Okay, they're coming on fast. Well, welcome. I'm Peter Roskam. I lead Baker Hostetler's federal policy team, and we're really pleased to be able to engage with you today to talk about last night's election results. I know I speak on behalf of our firm's leadership, Paul Schmidt, the chairman of the firm, and Jeff Paravano, who leads our tax practice and Washington office. And on behalf of the entire leadership, we're really pleased to be here. We're going to be recording this for purposes of a podcast. I have a podcast it's a firm podcast. It's called The Cloakroom with Peter Roskam. I interview current members of Congress in both parties and other Washington officials and journalists to really give a backstage view into what's going on. So this audio will be captured. And if you're a podcast enthusiast, I welcome you to subscribe. We're on Apple, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. And again, it's The Cloakroom with Peter Roskam. Okay, so I'm joined by my colleague, Heath Shuler. Heath and I were classmates in Congress. We came in together in 2006. We represent both sides of the aisle, and we've been at Baker Hostetler together now in our federal policy practice. And we're joined by Jim Ellis, who's president of Ellis Insight, who we were teasing before. He's probably been up all night because his job is to know what's going on and to know what happened. And so, Jim, what happened? What's going on? How are people to understand these numbers? And one other point, lots of folks were saying flip of the coin on all of this going in, myself included, and yet it's a very definitive win right now for President Trump and for Senate Republicans. We'll see where the House ends up. That's still an open question. But Jim, what happened?
Well, thank you, Peter. Heath, it's great to be with you. It was a very stunning night last night. It really could have gone any way. Everybody was thinking, well, this could be a coin flip or it could be a landslide either way. And I think once again, we saw the pattern that we had talked about before on the podcast about the Trump underpoll, and it was again evident. And I do have to stand up for the pollsters to some degree. And they were taking a lot of heat last night on TV. Oh, they missed it again. No, they didn't. They didn't really miss it. Missing it to me means you missed who won. There were plenty of polls that showed Donald Trump actually winning the national count and winning all of those states. But the margin they missed. So the margin of 1 or 2 points, he did better than that. And that has been a consistent pattern in all 3 times that Trump has run. And so I thought overall, I don't think you can say, oh, the pollsters missed this one again. But it was a great victory for Trump. And it looks like when we finally get the final numbers from Michigan and Arizona and Nevada, he may win all of the battleground states. And I was told that on the 26th of October at an event by Trump's Midwest director. And he says, I think we're going to win all the battlegrounds. And he said, I wouldn't be at this event if I didn't think that. And sure enough, he was right.
Heath, you've been in a lot of Democratic caucus meetings and gatherings over the years. What's the level of self-reflection within the Democratic Party right now in the leadership? Is it reflective to say we need to move, further to the center? We need to capture some of these things. Will the progressives and the left within the party, will they say, hey, see, this is the problem. We didn't go far enough. And what's that dynamic from your experience?
Well, Peter, I can always say that it's easy to be, the Monday morning quarterback, right? You can sit back and you can say,
you of all
hey,
people, you of all people,
you can really look at it and say, hey, here's what they should have done. But I think, self-reflection is going to be good. But the question is, I think it still remains, who's going to be the leader of the Democratic Party? And I think that's been missing for quite some time. I think Obama, once he left, I think there was a big void there. And I think there's some things that needs to change within the party. I think, unlike the Republicans who get their chairmanships and their leadership and they have them, they're term limited, right? Based upon the number of years they serve. The House doesn't necessarily do that. So you end up getting a much older chairmanship and leadership group. So, they're going to have to find and identify themselves as, in which path would they follow? Do they go back to kind of that '06 class that you and I came into, Peter, and kind of have the party of a very big tent that I think that Rahm Emanuel had that, understanding of how to run the Democratic Party? I think the first thing they should do is to go knock on Rahm Emanuel's door again and say, Rahm, it's time for you to come back in the fold. It was great being ambassador. Now you come home from Japan, and you need to figure out the solutions to make this work again. Because guess what? Since you've left, we've not figured it out.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Does, every once in a while, when there's big swings in elections, both sides tend to say, "Oh, this is a realignment. You're looking at a whole new political landscape that has a generational impact." And obviously, most times it's like, no, that's not actually true. You know what I mean? That doesn't explain it. Is this different? And here's what I mean by that. Donald Trump, notwithstanding all the criticisms of him, very harsh, criticisms of charges of racism and all these different things, did remarkably well comparatively with African American voters, did comparatively well with Hispanic voters, did comparatively well with young voters. And is there something new that's happening? Are people organizing and thinking of themselves in terms of sort of economic status more rather than racial lines? Or what you've seen these things develop and ebb and flow over the years. What's your take, Jim?
Oh, I think so. He seems to be able to connect with people, and people that you wouldn't expect to be for him. And it looks like among African American men, young African American men, some of the exit polls, and sometimes those aren't too accurate, but showed him around 20% in that group. And overall, he's in double digits with African Americans, and that hasn't happened for anybody else. The only other person that do this well among Hispanics was George W. Bush when he got 43% in 2004. Trump is around 40 or maybe a little bit higher. I mean, that's astonishing, really, for him, running against a candidate, an opponent of color. And she failed to connect with this group. And I think, Peter, you're absolutely right. I think it was the economic message that he has and the chance to move forward. And people do remember when he was president. Hey, I had it better when he was president, and some of the things he did. And I think the Democrats just went too far, particularly with certainly with the border. And I thought the Republicans really did a pretty good job in exploiting that border and the legislation or the votes they took to house these illegals in these hotels and give them money that could have been going to veterans, for example. I thought they did that pretty well. And I think that hit home big time from what I've seen out there.
Going back to Heath's admonition about Monday morning quarterbacking, it is so tempting to do. And so I'm going to do a little bit of it right now. But it does seem that if President Biden had recognized earlier that he was not up to the task of running and had allowed a competitive primary, it would have been really, really healthy for the Democratic Party, but that didn't happen. And then the other thing that didn't happen, and again, this is just speculation, what would it have been like if Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, had been on the ticket? His whole approach is different than Tim Walz, you know what I mean? Kind of a savvy, and I mean that in positively, like a centrist kind of speaking to that, very popular in Pennsylvania. Would that have made a difference in some of these battleground states? I mean, it seems so easy now, and I know none of these questions are easy, but it's like, well, I don't know. I think that could have been a clearer path one way or the other. I know that those are two mutually exclusive events, but both of them could have been dispositive.
I think particularly in Pennsylvania that you have to say that would be the case. And that I don't think that's Monday morning quarterback, Peter, because most people were saying at the time, why didn't she take Shapiro when she chose Tim Walz? So yeah, we'll never know for sure, but it very well may have made a difference in Pennsylvania. That would have changed the whole outcome.
So, Heath, you and I have been in Congress, and we know what a divided Congress is like. And I've experienced a unified Congress. What do you think is next if there's a if the GOP sweeps and picks up the House? By all accounts, it looks like it's going to be a razor thin margin, pretty significant margin in the Senate, razor thin in the House, and obviously Donald Trump in the White House. What do you anticipate looking forward that dynamic is like? And then let's go to what it would be like if Hakeem Jeffries is Speaker of the House and dealing with the Trump presidency.
Well, regardless of which political affiliation that you are, I always felt better when there was not unified, where one party didn't control all three, the presidential, the Senate, and the House. But when it's unified, it becomes a problem. I watched the Democrats go through it, and it was overreach votes after overreach votes after overreach votes, and then you get a swing back like happened in 2010 and 2012. It's that overreach. They feel like they got to do everything in 2 years, and the next thing you know, you're going to lose the House, you'll lose the Senate. And I love checks and balances. It's kind of like, I feel like when you have at least one of the three having opposition, that you have the guardrails up and you can't just pass at will. My problem and so that's my concern, and, kind of going, in the future of this, unless it's very narrow margins. And then the question in the House is going to be is who's going to switch sides? Is it going to be those what few moderate Democrats are left are going to vote in place of the far right 7 to 9 Republicans that are out there? Who are those individuals? Are they going to be? And maybe it's vice versa. If Hakeem Jeffries, I mean, they're going to be so slim margins that I hope that the 4-letter word compromise in Washington actually comes back into play, and I think that will serve our country really well.
Look, oh, go ahead, Jim.
Speaking of the House, so I've done some cursory looks at the races that are outstanding, and you've got a lot in California and Arizona because of the way they count the ballots and all their mail. And it's going to be quite a while before we get to what's happening there. But there are approximately 25 uncalled races that are close enough where they could alter the outcome. And both parties have about half. I think the Democrats currently have 13 of those 25, and Republicans have 12. And if you look at what's already happened and already called, the Republicans are now up 6. So that means the Democrats would really have to win 20 of those 25 just to get a 1-seat majority. So I think clearly the numbers favor the Republicans hanging on. And in the California seats, there are 9 in California that are up in the air. But 3 of those are Democratic seats right now, and 6 are Republican. But the Republicans in all 6 of theirs, they are ahead right now, all 6 of them. So I think the pendulum is swinging their way to hold the House. But as he said, it's going to be very slim.
So it will. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, the first line of discussion, Republican sweep. That means they've got a decision to make. First of all, they're going to have leadership elections, sounds like next week, which is a pretty common leadership practice. Like, hey, get out, get it done. We don't want to have too many adventures, not a lot of loose ends. Get these done.
How can they do that if they've got as many as 13 or 15 members that aren't even elected yet?
We were talking about that this morning, and the way they do that is they can vote provisionally. It's not a final vote. The only vote that they got to deal with in January is the speaker vote, so they can do it provisionally, et cetera. So that's probably the way they do it. Then they've got a decision about what to do in the lame duck, because remember, the continuing resolution comes up on December 20th. So the question is, does Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, strike a deal with the Democrats to some sort of, push things out, or does he meaning Trump gets a clean slate, or does do they wait until the Trump team is in place? And I don't think that decision's been made. In fact, I know I've been in touch with House leadership this morning, and they've communicated to me that this is really a question that they're waiting for guidance from President Trump. And once they do that, now I will say that there's some risk for Mike Johnson to strike a deal,
Right.
because
Yeah.
he will have some conservatives in the House
Then he's
that
done.
are not happy
Yeah, he's
with
no
him.
longer a speaker.
Well, but what he's going to have to do is basically say, "Hey, I've got a laminated hall pass here from Donald Trump. He's asked me to do this on his behalf." He would, if I'm the speaker, I would insist that the president be very vocal,
Yes.
supportive, and so forth, because otherwise, there's no incentive for him to do that.
And Peter, that's by far the best plan. You would rather, I mean, if you're in the House, you'd much rather in the presidency, you'd much rather start with a clean slate instead of a very challenging January to get so much of this done. Extend that as far as it possibly can to be able to reach an agreement with the Democrats and put all that issue back onto Biden.
Exactly. And January is going to be challenging enough, even assuming a clean slate. And let's get to that. So
right.
this, at Baker, we've got one of the biggest tax practices in big law. And so we've got a lot of tax partners whose clients are really, really tracking the whole tax dynamic. And so there's a lot happening. If the GOP the first thing that's got to happen is Congress has to decide if it's going to use a reconciliation vehicle. That means bypassing the Senate filibuster rule on these narrow things. We don't have time to go into details on that, but a reconciliation vehicle. They've got to figure out what's the reconciliation number. So how much money, in other words, can Congress borrow in the 10-year budget window? Is it $1 trillion? Is it 2? Is it $500 billion? Is it 3? Because that becomes the four corners of any sort of negotiation. If you don't have that number, the whole process is just mush. You don't have to say no to anybody. But once you have that number, once that gets locked into the reconciliation vehicle, then that binds both the House and the Senate. And remember, this is a Senate play. It binds both the House and the Senate to come up with a plan. And here's where it gets interesting for our clients, and here's where it gets interesting for anybody in America that pays taxes. Congress is going to be hungry for pay-fors, hungry for revenue. Remember, the debt has increased, $10 trillion plus in the last few years, and there's no end in sight. And I know personally, talking to members of Congress, unsolicited, it's coming up that they're very, very concerned about the debt. So what ends up happening is all kinds of pay-fors get identified. They may have been previously identified by some other tax plan or a White House plan or a Senate plan, but it's written down somewhere. And it can be in estate planning, for example. It can be tightening trust rules. It can be dealing with things on making wealth more difficult to transfer from one generation to another. It could be the corporate tax rate. You remember, Heath, when we had Jason Smith, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, at the Baker-Hostetler Legislative Seminar, and we were talking to him in front of the group, and he said, "Hey, when I was whipping the Smith-Wyden bill, I had House Republicans asking me why I wasn't raising the corporate tax rate." Or, provisions within the Inflation Reduction Act that are very, very deeply entrenched in red districts, even though these are things that passed on a Democrat reconciliation process. Republicans didn't support the Inflation Reduction Act, but now a number of their own constituencies are benefiting from them. And so all of this pressure is coming and really, really grinding. And the direction of these legislative races is completely dispositive on where this is going. So, Jim, how much of the campaign, Donald Trump was talking during the campaign in his some of his his events, hey, let's not tax tips anymore. Let's not tax overtime. Hey, you're a nice person riding a bicycle. Let's not tax your bicycle. I'm teasing, but you take my point. It was pretty expansive, like pretty
It was.
very, very expansive. Did auto loans get in there? I mean, there was a lot
It was
of
auto
stuff.
loans, yeah.
Okay, so you're a former NFL quarterback. You don't pay any more taxes,
Yeah.
Heath, etc. So what's the where? Let me ask you a campaign question, Jim. How much of that will actually drive policy? How much will Trump feel bound to that? Will he be like, yeah, I said some stuff. We're not going to worry about that too much, and does that fade away, or does that become central to his Nevada strategy moving forward? In terms of reaching out to service workers and tips. What's your sense on how much Republicans in Congress are going to feel like they've got to deliver on that?
I would think so. I mean, he went out on a limb on that, and he said it over and over and over. I think he used it in every rally he did, that was one thing he wanted to see happen. But Peter and Heath, I would think the bigger thing, and probably the biggest benefit of the Republican trifecta, is they probably get to extend the Trump tax cuts now, wouldn't you think? Because of the ones that expire in 2025.
Yeah, and
I would think that's number one, wouldn't you think?
yeah, that's where they'll start, for sure. And there's a lot of subtleties though with on the international side, for example. We at the firm are in touch with a lot of folks who are saying, hey, these international tax rules, they're not particularly easy to understand. They're fairly esoteric and they're highly technical, but they have a huge impact on our business. And they've had a huge impact on American businesses being able to buy foreign companies and repatriate that. But that's a story that can kind of get lost if it's not really well articulated.
Right.
And any host of other things. The state and local tax deduction, for example, the President Trump has said, hey, we got to get rid of that thing. Well, it's a huge number to deal with. And you've got most House Republicans that are from comparatively low tax states. They're not from California. They're not from New York. They're an overwhelming majority is from states that aren't impacted by the state and local tax deduction. And therefore they say, well, hey, I really don't care about this. But if you're in suburban New York, a Republican, if you're in Orange County as a Republican, you've got a real problem because now you're being asked to vote affirmatively on something that puts this thing into place. And I just think, it's going to be really, really interesting to see where this shakes out. Heath, let me ask you, you're living in Tennessee now, most of the time. What is it? What was it like on the ground in Tennessee as you were out and about? And how do you think a Trump presidency is going to be impactful on folks around you?
It was kind of unusual being in a swing state like North Carolina for so many years, and to watch every television commercial 2 months out before the election. That's all you received was that. You had very little. I mean, you would see a lot more signage. You didn't see, and when I went into to West North Carolina after the floods, there were signs in all the rural areas. You just continue. It was a continuation that, there are signs, but in Tennessee, there wasn't a whole lot. I mean, you just didn't have that, because I don't think, felt like that certainly wasn't a state that was going to be a swing state that you could change it. So, they don't run the commercials and they're not as, let's just say there's not as active. I mean, they still voted extremely, the outpour of votes were just one of the largest ever. But it wasn't the same as I have seen and certainly in North Carolina being a swing state.
It's interesting to look at what this new Congress will look like, and I think that there's a couple things to point out. Number one, we're used to seeing a centrist or a couple of centrists be the focus of power, the balance of power. And that's been Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who are no longer in Congress. Most eyes, I think, up until last night were turning to Susan Collins from Maine and Lisa Murkowski from Alaska saying, okay, those are Republicans that are that are likely to be able to make a deal or hold up something that's particularly aggressive on the GOP side. But if the Senate majority numbers land at, like, let's say 53 plus, all of a sudden Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski don't play that role. Jim,
right.
is that where we're going? Where do you think we land? Is it 53 or 54?
It could be 52, Peter, as well,
Oh,
because they got the three for sure. They've got West Virginia, Montana, and Ohio. And, you have David McCormick is, I think, in the best shape of the remaining outstanding ones, but it's just razor thin. And, those races have a tendency to go to the Democrats when they're in that situation. And the other two now, the Democratic incumbent, well, at least the incumbent in Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin, now has a small lead. So that's changed. And in Michigan, we have Alyssa Slotkin, the Democratic Congresswoman. She's now taken about a 2,000 vote lead, and she was behind all night. So if they both win, then the best Republicans can do is 53. And even that's not a guarantee. So they got 52 a lot. There's one other little angle that's going to happen here very, very soon. And that is, excuse me, before January 20th, J.D. Vance is going to resign to become vice president.
right.
And then Governor Mike DeWine will appoint a new senator.
Right.
And I was thinking about that this morning. So Bernie Moreno, who just got elected last night, all of a sudden he's going to be the senior senator from Ohio.
That's
What a country. What a country.
Yeah, that's right.
But is that true,
So-
though? Because they'll be sworn in at the exact same time, though.
Well, yeah, you're right, Heath. Maybe not.
Depends on-
maybe
I guess it
maybe the
depends on-
appointed senator would be the senior. Yeah, that's a good point.
There's
Well, it depends on when DeWine makes the appointment too.
Yeah, that's
True,
right.
yeah.
It's up to him. There's another dynamic too, because if the House majority is as close as we think it is on the Republican side, there are very ambitious House Republicans who would love nothing more than to go into the administration, but they're going to be landlocked. They are not going to be able to go. Why? Because getting a new House member has to go through a special election according to the U.S. Constitution. There is no appointment to the House of Representatives, which means you could be the most talented person in the world, but they're going to say, we can't wait 60, 90 days for this seat to be filled. You've got to stay. And the irony is that if the House GOP falls short and the Democrats take control, then it's like it'll be like a jailbreak, people trying to get out and going into the administration. And to your point earlier, Jim, that doesn't become an issue for Senate Republicans so long as they have a Republican governor who will make the appointment. So that frees up, there's talk about Tom Cotton, for example, being the Secretary of Defense, or Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, or any number of these other people who could be looked at for these roles. But that only happens if you've got a Republican. There's one other point that I think is
and Peter, the additional term or the additional caveat there, it's got to be a Republican governor in a state where the governor makes an appointment. Some states have a law that they immediately go to a special election for the Senate.
Yeah,
too, so
and that's out. Forget about
uniform.
that. Nobody's going to be playing that
nobody's going to
game.
want to do that. Yeah.
There's one other thing. We just have another minute left. There's another thing that is important to know and to observe closely, and that is the Congressional Review Act. The Congressional Review Act, as we know, is a look-back procedure where it allows a new administration and a new Congress to look back at promulgated rules that happened at the end of the previous administration. And it's a privileged motion in the Senate, meaning it only requires 51 votes. Last time, Donald Trump signed 16 Congressional Review Act repeals, which is you basically take something that is a final rule and you say, nope, it's out. It's out of the federal record. And it's not as easy. I'm making it sound easier than it is. It's a big adventure to get it done, but it is something for sure on across the entire spectrum: financial services, taxes, healthcare, energy, you name it. These things are going to be subject to a lot of scrutiny. So Well, for our purposes, we're going to stop now, and I want to say thank you to Heath Shuler and to Jim Ellis for joining us. And it's always a great conversation. And if you want to listen to this and other conversations like it that give you insight, please sign up and follow the Cloakroom with Peter Roskam. We're also going to stay on just for a couple of minutes to answer some questions. So if you've got a question, hit a get into the Q&A, and I'm gonna pull up some of these right now. And one of the questions is, what's the likelihood that there will be a revised fiscal year 25 budget request or supplemental request from the Trump administration? And if so, when might we expect this? And that's interesting. I think that's completely related to the Trump's decision on the lame duck, and we're not going to know until really they signal that. Another question is, if economics cost George H.W. Bush a second term, do you see a similarity with this election? Do you think it was the economy, Jim, or what were the factors that went into this?
Yeah, I think it was the economy and the border because they were really pushing that. I mean, the Democrats tried to push abortion, and that kind of fell flat this time. I'm a little surprised it did in the House because they seem to be running a single issue campaign on House races on abortion like they did last time. And Republicans, again, didn't respond to that. And I thought that was a big mistake on their part, but it looks like they got away with it. So, yeah, I think the drivers this time were personal economics and the border.
It's like my father said growing up as a kid. He says there's a lot of issues, but the single most issue that most people vote on is their wallet. and oftentimes I have now seen that to be the case.
Yeah, I think that's true. Next question is, does the election outcome have broader implications in terms of corporate governance? That's going to be really interesting. So what's the makeup of the SEC? How are they approaching, climate rules and a whole host of other things? There is an odd horseshoe effect that I've observed where there are House Republicans, and we kind of alluded to this a little bit, and their attitude towards big companies has changed. It's not like the old Wall Street Journal editorial page attitude towards corporations. Now it's much more suspect. And so I know that it's an indirect answer because the question really has to do with governance rules. And I would assume, based on Trump's disposition, that he's going to be governing more with a light hand than light touch than a heavy hand from governance rules in particular. And yet there's a lot of House Republicans that are not doing any candlelight vigils for big companies, if you know what I'm saying. And they don't like the agenda and so forth. So it's really an open question. Here's the question. No president has ever won without having his party control the House. Sounds like you don't see an exception to this. Yeah, I'd say that's true, Jim, based on the trend. And then same question or a different question from the same person. Do we think there will be a big or a small lame duck package? And that is all bouncing around in one man's head right now. And the person that's going to make that decision, like we talked about before, will be Donald Trump. What impact will this election have on federal financial agencies, Dem heads resigning, shift in issue focus, etc.? I think that there will be a big impact. I think Trump, even if folks aren't scheduled to be stepping back, I think, or their terms ordinarily resigning, I think Trump will take it on and try and get as much control as he possibly can as quickly as he can.
It'd be interesting to see this time how he the last election, it took him really years to fulfill all the seats. And matter of fact, I think he ended up not filling a substantial amount of those seats. And so it kind of slowed progress down. If you needed something within a department, it was almost challenging because there was no one in the department to make a decision. It'll be interesting to see how quickly he fills those seats and positions, and how quickly the departments change from the Biden policy that we see today to what will be the Trump policy.
Yeah, because he had an experience, as you pointed out, Heath, and then he's reflected, I think, a lot on that, and now he's coming in to say, okay, I know how this thing rolls, and I'm going to be ready, and like here we go. Oh, great question. What's the likelihood that he'll be able to enact the tariffs? Great question. So the tariff,
not a chance.
well, so the president has a lot of authority on tariffs. Across the board, 20%. That's a big load. And will he? This whole mercantilist approach to the economy, which Donald Trump really has been articulating, is starting to break through. You know what I mean? There's a lot of people who say, "Hey, I'm not as favor of a free trade agenda as I used to be," and I think at this point, it's been decades since we've had a real tariff debate in this country, and I think we're about to have a big one. So he's going to push hard, and this is where it could become linked to the tax question, really, because if you start pitching this and saying, "Hey, this is a pay for," and so forth, and you kind of create this false impression
if that becomes the case, Peter, I think that's what I think. What you're going to see is, I think that what I call the Chamber of Commerce Republicans, I don't think they were really in, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, I don't think they were 100% in with Donald Trump anyway. And if you start down that path, what happens to that void? What happens to those moderate Main Street type business Republicans? I mean, where do they go at that point in time?
Yeah.
If that happens? Because, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the chamber is not like what it once was within the Republican Party. If you look at it now, you look at what's happened on the union side. Donald Trump is catering more to the union side and less to the business side, which is fundamentally different than we have seen over the last 30, 40 years in this country.
It does really go to that paradigm shift. I think the tariff question is very much an open question. And it's something that Donald Trump believes in. And it's not just a negotiating tool, I don't think, in terms of, getting countries to comply with his wishes. I do think that he really thinks this works, and he's going to push it. The question is, how much of a buzzsaw does he run into if he's asking for more authority? Next question. If the IRA, that is the Inflation Reduction Act, were to be repealed, how quickly could that occur, and when would it be effective? That is, are the IRA credits safe for 2025? I think the ones are, if it's a natural sunset, it's on the table. If it's something that there is not a sunset, then it's in better shape. But Mark, who's the person that's asking, there is really nothing that's out there right now that's completely bulletproof, because this Congress is going to be heavy, heavy, heavy for revenues. And
it goes back to, you got to find some revenues. And I wonder if the Republicans will actually install the pay-go. I remember, Peter, you voted. That was the blue dog. That was a blue dog message. And, we didn't get a lot of support from our Democrat friends because they were in that particular time were in control. And, they didn't want to, have the Senate. The House had passed it, but the Senate, and it was almost it was a big bipartisan bill. The pay goes, pay as you go. It'll be interesting to see what happens. You're going to have to put some restraints on it. If not, what I've always felt has been one of the single biggest issues in our country is the debt and deficit that we continue to rack up. That's our problem. And it fell down. I think it was like number 8 or 9 on the list of priorities that people felt that it was important. But just wait. I mean, you continue to rack up these trillions of dollars and you have no pay-fors. You need to find wasteful spending and cuts the way the blue dogs used to. Find areas that you need to cut in the federal government to be able to offset the revenues that you'll not ever take back in again.
Next question is, I work in the auto industry for an EV car manufacturer. What impact could a Musk appointment overseeing some portion of my industry have? I think pretty significant. I mean, like Donald or, Elon Musk is now the Trump whisperer. He's got great deal of influence, and there's I'll put it this way. If Musk weren't in the scene politically like he is in a Trump administration, EVs would be, House Republicans, Senate Republicans are itching to go after those. And it will be interesting to see, the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object here, because there's two things that are in conflict, and particularly in the Michigan election results, where my understanding is that EVs were a big issue, and you had a lot of folks in Michigan who were pretty hostile to the mandates. And my sense is that Musk will be a fairly effective interlocutor inside the administration, advocating on behalf of the industry.
Elon Musk played this better than any politician in this entire election, because he knew that electric vehicles and space exploration is a top of the list for scientists and the Democrats, right? And environmental issues, right? So why not hedge your bet and go over to the Republican side, knowing that the Democrats are never going to bother you in your business side? Go over and hedge your bet and befriend Donald Trump to ensure that, hey, regardless of who wins, guess what? My company stays at the top. I think he's the most brilliant thing of any person in this entire election was Elon Musk.
Pretty savvy operator. One question: do we think they'll get rid of the Department of Education? Not a chance. It'll never happen. What will happen to the Federal Trade Commission? Interesting question. So Lina Khan is the chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission and is a figure that gets a lot of attention. And the irony is, most of the Democrats have a high view of the work that she's doing. She's taking on a lot of big companies and competitive issues and so forth. There's a lot of voices that are highly critical of her and have a low view of what she's doing and the economic impact. But interestingly, she's got some friends in the GOP and some Josh Hawley and Senator from Missouri and others who are with her. This goes to this populist anti-corporate dynamic within the Republican Party that's emerging. So I would say, there's nothing that's going to happen in terms of the FTC's independence, but what they're able to do, if I was an appropriator and I had the Federal Trade Commission under my jurisdiction, I would be asking and pushing tough questions. That's the way to influence and restrain the FTC. But absent that, I think Lina Khan, as the chair, is a person of significant prominence who's likely to ride out her seat.
So Peter, I have a question for both of you guys. NATO, what happens with NATO?
So I think so. If you're a NATO leader and you're waking up today, you are feeling more pressure and what you're trying to do is figuring out, is Donald Trump's rhetoric, is that a negotiating tactic, or is this a worldview? And I think, the whole foreign policy side, what this means for Zelensky in Ukraine, what this means to Netanyahu in Israel, what this means to Xi Jinping and President-elect Lai in China and Taiwan, respectively. Those are all questions that have yet to be sorted out. But if I was in NATO, I'd be thinking we are going to be forced to put more money to contribute more for defense. I just think that's the way it's getting through. Well, listen, everybody, you've been great with your time. I think we got 95% of the questions in, and regret that we weren't able to get every one. But if there's ways that we can help you, if you've got questions or comments for us or for our federal policy team here at Baker or any of the practice groups at Baker Hostetler, we'd be delighted to hear from you. And again, if you're interested, check out the Cloakroom with Peter Roskam. It's a podcast that I think you'll enjoy. So we say thanks and have a good day.